fully awaken is by cultivating the Bodhisattva mind, and having cultivated the Bodhisattva mind, then engage in a practice of self-perfections, and especially the perfection of wisdom, because it is only through the wisdom realizing the emptiness that one can completely destroy all the delusion and the root of all the delusions, as well as the obscurations to obscuration of knowledge, or the obscuration to become fully enlightened one. And as is mentioned in many sutras, wisdom is like someone with the eyes, and the 5 other perfections are like a blind, and all this has to be led through the eye of the wisdom. And so without the wisdom, those other practice cannot really become cause for enlightenment. But when they are supported by the wisdom and the Bodhisattva mind, then they can become cause and condition to fully enlightenment. And so we have to see where we, in relation to that, then we are at chapter 9, the chapter on wisdom. Which verses are we? I think, are we in 48? Are we in verse number 48? I think we finished 47 last week, yeah?
I think we're at 45.
45?
I think so. That's what I have down in my note.
Okay. I think so. Yeah. Seems 45. Okay.
Geshe, what page are you on?
Page number 131. It depends on which translation. Which translation is yours?
It's the one that we've been using for the last couple of years by Batchelor.
Oh, Stephen Batchelor, yeah, that is 131.
Okay.
So did we finish the 45, or we are on 45?
I have no idea. I wasn't here last week.
Okay. I think maybe we might be on 45. Okay. So this is, again, as we talk about Babasika schools, they think the Mahayana teachings, such as personal paramita teachings, are not taught by Buddha himself. And so here Shantideva is kind of defending why those teachings are taught by Buddha Shakyamuni, and why they are having a conflict here is because when we Mahayana present emptiness, then the Mahayana present emptiness from the personal paramita point of view, according to those teachings. So then Babasika, it is the presentation of emptiness is very different from their presentation. So therefore, that is where they are having difficult to understand fully, and then that is where they think. So that is where it is. So here in 45, here he said, because Bhavasika, because of your not recognizing one scriptures, such as Prasnaparamita Sutra, as having the complete characteristic of Buddha's speech, then you can say all Mahayana texts are corrupt. And how? So it is saying, how can you say all the Mahayana teachings are not taught by Buddha and corrupt based on your based on one particular scripture, such as Prasnaparamita, that you cannot, because you cannot recognize it. If that is the case, then he is saying, then he's saying, for the same reason, because one text, such as the Samdi Nirmo Chana Sutras, is similar to your text in having all the characteristics of Buddha's speech, So in that sutra, then the presentations of that Mahayana Sutra, Samdi Nirmo Chana Sutra, the way it is presented is very much similar to the sutra that are recognized as a valid sutra by those Vabhavska, So then he is saying that Mahayana Sutra is very similar or almost same to the sutra of your sutra, which you hold as a valid. And so therefore, why not say that all Mahayana texts are spoken by concurrent? So what is making it is making a point on the basis because one sutra of Mahayana is not similar to the sutra that you mentioned. Therefore, you cannot say all the Mahayana teachers are not taught by the Buddha. If that's the case, then there are also some sutra which are same and which explain similar like that, explaining your sutra. So therefore, on the basis of similarity to one sutra, then you should also say all sutras are taught by Buddha. If you say they are all Mahayana teachers are not taught by Buddha on the basis because one sutra is not similar. So that is the kind of. And then Bhavasika is saying, if Mahayana texts such as Prasnaparamita, such as like Heart Sutra, and there are many different levels of Prasnaparamita, 100,000 verses, 20,000 verses, 80,000, 8,000 verses, and then like such as short one like Heart Sutra, those are Prasnaparamita Sutra. Prasna means, wisdom, and Paramita means perfection, the perfection of wisdom sutras. If the Mahayana text, such as Prasnaparamita Sutra, were the word of Buddha, surely the great Kashyapa. So Kashyapa is one of the Buddha's main disciples. After Buddha passed away, he became the leader of the group, So he was a very subdued monk, arhat, elderly, and I think, and so after Buddha passed away, all the monks kind of asked him to take the as the leader, and so he was the leader, yeah. And so that is where the great Kashyapa means. So surely the great Kashyapa and other arhat would have understood them. Since they did not, they cannot be word of the Buddha. So they're saying, such as great Kashyapa, they didn't understood. They didn't have the understanding of the emptiness that is taught in the Prasnaparamita, So if that is taught by the Buddha, how come such as great Kashyapa, that he couldn't, that he was unable to realize that, realize that. So that is the point. And then the answer is the emptiness that is explained in the Prasna Paramita, since they are extremely profound, they are much more subtle. They are much more profound and subtle than the selflessness explained in the Sutra of, Four Noble Truths, So therefore, even the great Kashyapa and other arhats, could not fathom the depth of what was expressed in the teachings of Mahayana scriptures, such as Prasna Paramita, So therefore, even them, they couldn't have a full grasp of the subtle and most subtle and profound teaching of those Prasna Paramita, such as Mahayana teachings, such as Prasna Paramita. Therefore, just because you do not understand them, who could regard this as a reason for not accepting them as a word of Buddha? So yeah, on the basis on that someone didn't understood completely, that doesn't mean that it was not spoken by that person, such as Buddha. Again, that would be example. There are many teachings that His Holiness Dalai Lama give, which we cannot understand all of them. Not we, even some of the great scholars of lamas, geshes, also sometimes they cannot understand all the subtlety, details of such as like His Holiness the Lama. Just because they do not understand, does that mean that was not teaching spoken or given by His Holiness? And so same thing here, just because someone who is supposed to be great disciple, on the basis them not being able to understand everything, that doesn't mean that Buddha has not spoken that. And so that was the argument. And then next, 47, monk arhat is the root of establishing the present of the Buddha's teachings, but it will be hard for those whose mind still apprehend true existence, have not understood emptiness to be monk arhat. So now, in order to become an arhat, you need to have in order to become an arhat, the purpose of practicing the Dharma is to achieve nirvana and become arhat, whether it is a individual arhat or it is a Mahayana arhat, such as the Buddha, And in order to become an arhat, then we need to overcome all the obscuration of the delusions. And in order to overcome the obscuration delusion, then one need to cultivate the wisdom realizing the emptiness. And so therefore, then if you don't have realization of emptiness, then one will not be able to overcome the delusion. If one does not overcome the delusion, then one will not be able to achieve arhat. And if one is not able to achieve arhat, then the essence of the Dharma, the purpose of teaching and the purpose of teaching the Dharma is to practice, and by practicing to achieve nirvana. And so then it doesn't serve that purpose if that is, because they could not have fully abandoned disturbing conceptions, those are the delusions. Therefore, since they would not be abandoning suffering, so if you don't overcome the delusions, disturbing conceptions, then you will not be able to overcome the suffering, because you have not overcome the principal cause of the suffering. And if you have not overcome the principal cause of the suffering, you will not be able to overcome the sufferings. And if you are not overcome the suffering, then it will be hard for them to have attained the state beyond sorrow or nirvana, And nirvana means, free from all the sufferings and the causes of sufferings. And so therefore, what it is saying is, why we, in order to achieve nirvana, the needs to have the realization of emptiness. Without that, it's not possible. So that is why. So again, Babasika is saying, although they do not understand such an emptiness, so he's saying, such as Arhat, like great Kashapa and others Arhat, even though they do not, they do not have realizations of emptiness as it is explained in the Mahayana teachings, personal paramita, but they are free from suffering because they have abandoned their disturbing conceptions, because they have abandoned the cause of the suffering, that is all the delusions or disturbing conceptions. And how did they do that? By means of meditating upon such things as impermanent and personal identitylessness. So just as all the teaching that is explained in such as the teaching on Four Noble Truth, it explained on impermanent and selflessness. Selflessness, not as subtle as the Mahayana explained, but a gross level of selflessness, such as the persons not existing, substantially and autonomously. They say there is no person that exists substantially and autonomously existing, and so they understand non-existing of person as a substantial persons or autonomous persons. So through that kind of realization, then they are able to overcome the delusions, and thereby overcoming the delusion, they are able to overcome the suffering that arise from those delusions, and therefore they are able to achieve nirvana. So that is the Bhavasikas saying, those arhat have achieved nirvana, and saying then again, Madhyamika making the point again, however, because of having abandoned their misconception, do they become devoid of suffering as soon as they attain the state of arhat with recity? So here is saying, then anyone who have understood the gross level of selflessness without having to understood the subtle level of selflessness, immediately they will become an arhat, and therefore immediately they will be free from sufferings. So does that mean immediately will they be, attain the state of arhat? And so they are saying, although those arhat have no disturbing conceptions, again, even though, those arhat have overcome the gross level of delusion or disturbing conceptions, but they have not overcome the subtle level of disturbing conceptions or delusions because they have not understood the subtle level of emptiness, And so therefore, it was clearly taught that through the latent force of their previous actions, arhats such as Mongolayana experienced sufferings, So due to their, even though they have no more gross level of delusions, but due to still imprint from the past, which they have not overcome, still, such as Mongoliana, sometimes they can also experience as suffering. So therefore, they are not totally free from suffering unless you have overcome the subtle delusions. And so that is where, although they temporarily are not free from the suffering, as soon as they abandon their disturbing conceptions, they will be free when they leave their body, because they definitely do not have any craving for the aggregates of body and the mind, which is a principal condition for conditioned existence. So what they are saying, even though, such as Mongoliana, Arhat, even though they might have suffering now because of the imprint from the past, even though they don't have any more delusions anymore, but once they die, once they leave this body, then they will not come back to the samsara. Because in order to come to the samsara, what drive us, any beings, to the samsara, what kind of pulls a being in samsara is the craving, desire. And since those arhat have overcome all this craving and desire and all delusions, so there is no cause to pull them to the samsara. And so therefore, after they die, after they leave this body, then there is no more coming back to the samsara. And so that is what the cautions. And so then to that here is said, yet while they still have a form of craving, that is a completely undisturbing state of confusion, why would they not take rebirth with aggregate contaminated by action and disturbing conceptions? So from the Mahayana point of view, not Mahayana, from the Madhyamika point of view, if you have not understood the subtle level of emptiness, according to as it explained in Prajnaparamita Sutras, then and even though you have realizations of selflessness, as it is presented in the sutra of such as Four Noble Truth, the first turning wheel of the Dharma, by that realization, you can overcome gross level of self-grasping and all the delusions that arises due to that gross level of self-grasping. But if you have not understood emptiness according to the Prajnaparamita Sutra, the subtle level, then you still have subtle grasping. Someone will still have a subtle grasping of self. And due to that subtle grasping, there will be a subtle level of delusions, such as craving, anger, and others. Not a gross level, but there will be subtle level of those. And if you have that subtle level of craving, desire, and anger, and so forth, then that subtle level of the craving will fool you towards the samsara. Through that subtle level of the delusions, you will continue to create karma, contaminated actions. And at the time of death, your craving will activate that karmic seed. And by the craving, having activated that karmic seed, then one will take birth in the samsara. And so therefore, again, unless you have the subtle realization of emptiness, you cannot free from the samsara or samsara rebirth. So that is what the point that Madhyamika is making. And they would, because the causal condition of feeling associated apprehension to existence definitely produce craving, and so-called arhat do have such feeling. So again, the arhat, according to the Bhavasika school of thought of schools, who have not understood the subtle emptiness or selflessness, they still have feelings. And not only there is feeling, they have feeling because they have not abandoned the subtle grasping, they have subtle grasping that feelings. And if you have a grasping to that feeling, then that will lead to craving or desire. And so therefore, and so therefore they still have the craving, and that create cause and conditions to take rebirth in the samsara. And so that is what. Since a mind that lacks the understanding of emptiness is mind that still apprehend true existence, If you don't have a subtle understanding of emptiness, according to the, as it is explained in Prasanaparamita Sutra, even though you don't have grasping of the persons as a substantially existent, you don't have grasping as the persons as a autonomous existent, but you still have grasping of persons as truly existent, inherently existence. And therefore, that grasping lead to the feeling, to the other delusion to arises. And therefore, it will still conceive some objects as truly existence, And as long as you are truly existent, then there is still grasping, subtle level of grasping. As long as there is subtle level of grasping, there will be still subtle level of delusions. And so therefore, you are not totally free from the delusions, even though they might be free from the gross level of delusions. And next one, although it manifests, disturbing conceptions may temporarily cease, they will nevertheless arise again in the same way that during the equipoise or non-discernment. So it is saying, through your realizations of the gross level of selflessness, then you can kind of stop the delusions or disturbing conceptions or delusions from manifesting on the gross level. And therefore, it ceases to manifest. It is not manifesting. Even though it is not manifesting, but it is still there. And so later, when the certain cause and conditions arises, then again, because you have that subtle grasping, then that will manifest. And when that grasping manifests, then delusion will arise again. And so here is saying, just like when someone is in deep meditation, meditative equipoise, because of their strong meditations, in that moment, no other feeling or emotion arises, and therefore delusion also does not manifest in that moment. But when you come out of that meditative state, and when you're in post-meditative state, then when you encounter cause and conditions, then again, when you encounter objects and certain cause and condition arises, that give rise to the delusions again. So therefore, one has not been able to, even though it's temporarily ceased, only to arise again later when the period of equipoise is over. Therefore, those who wish to put into the all suffering should meditate on emptiness. Therefore, if we want to overcome the delusions totally, forever, then we need to have a realization on emptiness, the subtle emptiness, you know. So that is what he's saying. Also, when we have for example, when someone has developed a, you know, karma abiding shamatha, you know, and when they are in deep meditations in shamatha, you know, because of that, their shamatha, you are so focused and attentive to that whatever object you are focusing on, no other emotions arises, no other feeling arises, and so therefore the delusion does not manifest, arise in that moment. But when you are out of that karma abiding or concentration, and when you engage into the other activities, because you are not deep meditations, then again, when you encounter certain cause and conditions, then that gives rise to the delusions. So it is only temporary in that state. So similar with that. So here is, but if you want to get rid of the delusion permanently, forever, then we need to have the realization of understanding and realization of subtle impermanent. Subtle emptiness. And the verse number, it says, when one understands emptiness, compassion should arise for those who experience sufferings. So other sentient beings, you know, when you encounter other sentient beings who are suffering, you know, then that gives rise to the compassions. As a result of being confused about the emptiness, you know. Then while remaining in cycle existence, to accomplish inconceivable benefit for others by means of liberating them from the true extreme of desire, the happiness of cyclic existence, and fearing suffering, is a fruit of meditation on emptiness. So what it is saying is, when you have a correct realization, understanding of emptiness, on one, you know, it helps us to overcome all the delusions. And by having overcome all the delusions, we are able to overcome samsara, able to overcome the samsara, and therefore not remaining in samsara due to the delusion and contaminated karma. Therefore, one is able to get total freedom from the contaminated actions or karma and the delusions. On the other hand, due to the realization of emptiness, it gives rise to the compassions. It gives rise to the compassions towards all sentient beings who are suffering. And because of that incredible compassions, then one will also not fall in another extreme where you bliss out in the individual liberations. Instead, that compassion will bring us into samsara to free all sentient beings from the suffering and cause of sufferings. And so, therefore, correct realizations of emptiness, unmistaken emptiness, will help us to find the middle way, not falling in one of the extreme of samsara or the extreme of individual liberations. And that is why the Buddhas are free from those extremes due to the compassion and realization of emptiness, and that compassion, that is, and the compassion which is cultivated and developed on the basis of realization of emptiness. So generally, there are two types of bodhisattvas, just like, there are bodhisattvas who have more sharp faculty, and there are bodhisattvas who have less sharp faculties. And those who have sharp faculty, bodhisattvas with the sharp faculties, first they have realization of emptiness. From the basis of understanding the emptiness, then they realize the possible of overcoming all the delusions, because they see, once you have realization of emptiness, then you can see with that realization of emptiness, you can overcome the fundamental ignorance, which is the root cause of all the delusions. And you begin to see the possible of overcoming that fundamental ignorance, and thereby overcoming that all the delusions, thereby overcoming the samsara, and therefore the possibility of achieving enlightenment. And when you see the possibility of achieving enlightenment with your own experience, then you started to really have a strong aspirations and wish to achieve that fully enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. And therefore, then they develop bodhicitta mind on the basis of that wisdom. And so that is why here I think it is saying how realization of emptiness lead to cultivating the compassions and the bodhicitta mind. The remedy, the next is 53. The remedy for the darkness of the obscuration of disturbing conceptions. So that is one kind of obscurations, the obscuration of the delusions or disturbing conceptions, as well as the obscuration of knowledge. The obscuration of knowledge is the imprint left by the delusion. It is not the delusion itself, but the imprint left by the delusions. So it is explained like, it's like the scent frequency of the garlic. Even though there's no more garlic, but still there is the smell of the garlic in the pot. So even though there is no more delusions, but still there is the imprint of that delusions, and that is the obscuration to knowledge. And that is the one which obscure us from becoming fully enlightened. That obscuration give arise to the appearance of objects as appearing truly existence. And therefore, even though you might not have grasping that, but there is still that appearance due to that. And so that is what is called obscuration knowledge. And to overcome those both obscurations, then what we need is meditation on emptiness. We need the realization of emptiness. And in order to have the realization of emptiness, of course, we need to meditate on the emptiness. So with the realization of emptiness, supported by the moral discipline and meditative concentrations, we can overcome the obscurations of the defilement or delusion or of distractive conceptions, okay? But just by that itself, one will not be able to overcome the subtle obscuration, the obscuration of knowledge. In order to overcome the subtle obscuration of knowledge, not only we need the wisdom realizing emptiness supported by the supported by moral discipline and material concentration, but it needs to be also strongly supported by a bodhisattva mind. And when it is supported by that bodhisattva mind, together with bodhisattva and wisdom, then one can overcome that subtle obscurations of the knowledge. And so therefore, in order to do that, we need to have a realization of emptiness. To have the realization of emptiness, one need to meditate on emptiness. Therefore, why do those who wish to quickly obtain omniscience not meditate on emptiness? So here is saying that's the key. Realization of emptiness is the key to achieve fully enlightenment. That being the case, whoever aspire to achieve fully enlightenment, one should meditate on emptiness and cultivate the wisdom realizing the emptiness. That is the only way, there is no other way to achieve enlightenment. And so that, since understanding emptiness has such advantage, so much benefit, and not understanding it has such a disadvantage, it is quite invalid to aim criticism in direction of emptiness. If we have the realization of emptiness, even in this life, we can immediately kind of reduce the level of our negative emotions, feelings, and state of mind, reduce the intensity of those negative emotions, reduce the duration of those negative emotions. And the less longer those negative emotions, the less longer those negative emotions, the less we suffer. The less intensity of those negative emotions, the less we suffer. And if we have strong realizations, then eventually, those will manifest less and less and less. Eventually, one can overcome all of that. So through that, we can find much more joy, happiness, peace in our life. And also definitely, if we want to achieve liberation, it is the only door, the only way to achieve liberation is through the wisdom realizing emptiness. And the only way and the door to achieve fully enlightenment is through the wisdom realizing emptiness and bodhisattva. And so therefore, that being the case, without emptiness, all of those will be not possible. And so therefore, one should try to meditate on the emptiness to have to develop the wisdom realizing the emptiness. Therefore, without any doubt as to whether it is the path of the Buddha or not, one should meditate on emptiness. So, as I mentioned last week, even though there was some kind of discussions between the Babasika and Madhyamika, whether the Mahayana teaching are taught by Buddha or not, especially the Prajnaparamita Sutras, whether those are taught by Buddha or not. The main point is, it doesn't matter whether it was taught by Buddha or not, but it's a crucial, to achieve our happiness, short-term happiness, temporary happiness, as well as ultimate happiness of liberation and nirvana. And therefore, we have no other options if we want to achieve those, but to meditate on emptiness and to develop the wisdom realizing that. So then again, there could be some doubt and objections. I do not want to meditate on emptiness because it's frightening me. And and again, for some individuals, it is said, if you don't have enough merit, if we don't have enough support of the merit and virtues, sometimes when we meditate on emptiness, it can lead to a little bit of frightening, because we begin to lose sense of identity in that meditations. And then that can induce some kind of fear, because we have a strong sense of identity of who we are, in terms of our physical appearance, in terms of our, the way we think, our views, our ideas, our state of mind. So we have identified ourselves with so many of all of that, personified and identified. And when we do meditation on emptiness, we break down each of them. And through meditation on emptiness, when we break down each of them, it's part of what we feel so strongly who we are, all these identifications, all these fixations. Then it felt like you are totally kind of exposed, negate, And when that happens for some people, it can be frightening. It doesn't frighten everyone's, but if you don't have strong support of the virtuous merits, then sometimes it can be possible. And because of that, then it is saying, that is why I do not want to meditate on emptiness, because it makes me frightening. And so to reply that, it would be correct to be afraid of that which actually produces suffering, which if there is something we need to be afraid, then it should be something to think, to cause and conditions that produce the suffering, because no one wants suffering. We do not want suffering. And if there is any cause and condition that produce that suffering, we should be afraid of that cause and conditions. And that cause of condition suffering is the apprehension of truly existent, that is grasping, apprehension or grasping of truly existence, that fundamental ignorance. We should be afraid of that fundamental ignorance, the grasping, self-grasping, If there is any object that we should be very afraid of, very fearful of, frightening of, it is that fundamental ignorance. That grasping, that is the very root of all the sufferings. So therefore, but why be afraid of meditating on emptiness if it pacifies all suffering? So here is saying, if we have to be afraid, we should be afraid of that fundamental ignorance, not afraid of the wisdom that relies emptiness, that can destroy that fundamental ignorance and thereby pacify or overcome all the sufferings. So here is saying, we are being afraid of something we shouldn't be afraid, and we are not being afraid of something we should be afraid. Something which we should be afraid and fearful is that fundamental ignorance, which we are not. And something we shouldn't be fearful and afraid is that meditating on emptiness, the wisdom relies on emptiness, but to which we are afraid and fearful. So there is saying, then yeah. So I think we will have a short kind of 10 minutes break here. Okay. So everyone, welcome back again. If anyone has questions, please feel comfortable without any hesitations to ask directly or to send. Okay. So then, when selflessness or emptiness is presented, normally, first, the selflessness or emptiness of persons is presented, and then selflessness or emptiness of phenomena is presented. And so here first is presenting the selflessness of the persons. So where is identitylessness of the person or selflessness of the persons? Verse number 56, again, because we talked about earlier the objections of being not wanting to meditate on emptiness because of being fearful or frightening of that. So next 56, if a truly existing self exists, if there is a inherently or truly existing self exists, then of course there will be a strong grasping to that, And when there is a strong grasping, sometimes we think, what might happen to me? There is a sense of grasping to self or me or I, as when we do that meditations, it feels like, there's no self, there's no I. And so that there's grasping to that self, and that makes us to be afraid. And so therefore it would be justifiable to be afraid of any object at all when we have a strong grasping and clinging to that, But since such self does not exist, but since even though our grasping grasps to exist, truly existing self, but in reality, there is no truly existing self. And since there's no truly existing self to cling on, to grasp on, so there is no object to hold on, to cling on, to grasp on. And when there is no object to cling on, grasp on, then who is there to become afraid, So then there's no person to be afraid of, because there is no objects. And so through that, again, we can, one can overcome the fear, by realizing, by recognizing, and by realizing, there is no truly existing fear itself. There is no truly existing self which is fearful of something, and there is no object. There is no inherently or truly existing objects to be fear of. And so when we realize, when we meditate and we realize that, then we can overcome the fear, or at least to reduce the fear when it is done, that kind of analyze meditation is done properly, And then now it comes to, so here, because now is the presentations of the selfless of persons. So when we talk about selflessness of persons or emptiness of the persons, first we have to recognize, what is to the object that is to be refuted, the object that is to be negated, the object that when we say selflessness, no self, or so when we say no self, we have to identify and recognize the self that has been negated, the self that has been refuted. If we don't recognize that properly, then even when you do the meditation, the analysis, it might not become so effective. I think the first Dalai Lama, it says, it's like the example is slightly different, but I can kind of use, you have the target on the, when you are trying to hit, whether you are trying to shoot arrow or gun to the target, if you keep the target on the east and if you shoot on the west, you will totally miss it. Same way, in order to our meditations on emptiness, the analysis to become effective and to really to be able to really hit the point, then we first need to have better understanding of the self that is being negated, that has been reputed when we talk about non-self or selflessness or emptiness of the self, And so in order to understand that, there is few verses from the 7th Dalai Lama that might be helpful, where he says, in our dream, we dream about, your friends being with you, your families, friends being with you, or, yourself with being in some particular place and doing some activities, whatever that is, When we dream that, in our dream, it appears to the dream as though we are really with the friend itself, As though we are, to our dream, it appears, the friend is with us or we are with them in real. It appears as we are in that place in real. It appears that we are doing whatever different activities that we are dreaming about. It feels that we are really doing that, whether we are jumping, whether we are swimming, whether we are driving, whatever. It feels like we are really doing that, truly or really doing that. That is how it appears to our dream. Objectively from its own side. Even though that is not the case, even though our dream, it appeared that way, but in reality, we are not really together with our friend. We are not in that place. We are not doing whatever different activities that we are engaging in. It's not true. It's not real. But to our dream, it appears so real, as to appear as it's so true, as it's so real. In same way, in the same way, then such as self, others, samsara, nirvana, all, all of them. Before that, maybe there is with the dream in the dream. Even though it appears so real from objectively, but all of them is merely, it all comes from our mind, due to certain imprint, due to certain cause and condition. Then all is creation of our mind. All of that in our dream, what is happening is just creation of our mind. It's just creation of our mind. It's just merely that dream state exists merely from our state of mind, but depending on our mind, created by our mind. And same thing when some kind of magicians do some trick, whatever trick they do, as a magicians, to us it appears so real, whatever their creations in their magic, maybe from nowhere they create some kind of birds from a vase. From nowhere they created all kind of things. So again, even though it appeared to us, whatever creations of that magicians through his trick, it appeared to us so real from that objective, so true from objective. But there is nothing so real and so true as it appeared to us from that objectively. It's a trick, and then it's due to our mind, our whatever consciousness through which we are seeing, and so therefore again, there's nothing really it exists, but it is again creation of mind. Through our mind we see that way. It appeared to us that way, depending by our mind. So just like example of those, the dream state and the creation of magicians, in same way, the concept of self and others, the idea or concept of self and others, samsara, nirvana, and all the phenomena, even though they appear to us, each of those objects, when there is appearance of self or others, or the concept of samsara, nirvana, or any other objects that appear to our mind, whether it's a sense consciousness or mental consciousness, whatever it appears to our mind, it appears them existing as truly from its own side objectively. Even though they are depending on our mind, they are creations of mind, just like the example of dream and magicians' creations, or trick. Similarly, it is just, even though it is merely imputed or created by our mind, but to our mind, it appeared to exist not from our mind. It doesn't appear to us. It is that objects is appearing or existing from due to our mind. It appears as from its own side, objectively, truly from objective side. Hmm? And so here's in same way, due to the sleepness. I don't know sleepness is that if there's any English word sleepness. Due to the sleepiness, I guess, can you say sleepiness? Is there a, yeah? Due to the sleepiness of ignorance from the beginning lifetime, due to the beginning lifetime, due to the ignorance of the beginning lifetime, then that due to that sleepiness of that from ignorance from the beginning lifetime, then all objects, just like in dream, appear to exist from its own side, objectively from its own side, even though they do not exist objectively from its own side to our mind. Is that how it appeared to us? And so he says, check on that mind, how it appeared to that mind. Check on that. Analyze, investigate, be aware of that. So when we analyze how things appear to our mind, when we analyze, when we observe our mind, when we are able to observe our mind, and when we are able to investigate and analyze our mind, how things appear to our mind, when the object of our attachment arises, how does that object appear to us? The object of your attachment. Object of our anger, when we have anger, how does that object of your anger appear to your anger, your mind? When we have a jealousy, how does that object appear to your mind, your jealousy? When we have fear, how does that object appear to us or our mind? If we analyze, if you observe, there is appearance of, pleasant, good, beautiful objects. When we are attached, there is appearance of unpleasantness, evilness, badness in terms of object of attachment, And not only there's appearance of that, there is the appearance of that, whatever qualities, beautiness, goodness, existing from that its own side, objectively from its own side. The unpleasantness, the ugliness, from its own side, objectively from its own side. That's how it appears. It doesn't appear to us that objects arising from our mind or appearing to us due to our mind. Coming from our mind. So there is appearance of that existing from its own side objectively, that one, as though it feels that we can kind of, it appears so real that it feels like we can kind of hold on that, we can grasp on that. It feels like we can kind of pinpoint that, the object there, you know. And if the things exist the way it appeared to us, objectively from its own side, objectively from its own side, and truly existing, then when we do deeper analysis, and try to find that object, that qualities, or the object within each of the parts or within the base of that object, then we cannot find. We are unable to locate, we are unable to pinpoint. You know, if it's a physical form, if we try to pinpoint, you know, within each of the parts that make that objects, the shape, the color, and so forth, each of those particles, we cannot pinpoint and say this is it. We are unable to locate, pinpoint. But before we did that analyze, to our mind, it feels like, you know, as though we can pinpoint, as though we can find there, within the basis, within that parts. It feels like that, but when we really do deeper analysis, we cannot pinpoint, either within the each of the parts, either within the collections, either within the continuity. We cannot kind of pinpoint and say this is it. But to our mind, it appears, it exists from its own side where we can pinpoint, as though it doesn't not depend on other factors such as our mind. It exists its own side objectively, and that is the object to be negated. That is the object to be refuted and negated when we do the meditation on emptiness or meditation on selflessness. And if we are able to recognize, identify that clearly, then when we do the analysis, then it will be more effective. If we are able to recognize and understand that better, strongly, the more effective when you do the analyze the meditations. Otherwise, even though we are doing the meditation and analysis, you know, still it doesn't really become effective. And because we are missing the target, and so that is where we have to, and in many of the scriptures, when they talk about identifying that the object to be negated or refuted, such as the self, which is going to be refuted or self, it says, you know, it would be helpful to watch and to observe when you have a strong sense of feeling of strong emotions, you know, whatever that emotion might be, very strong emotions, you know, when there's strong fear, for example, you know, fear of I might die, fear of I'm dying, the fear of I might get sick, or the fear of I'm sick, the fear of I might lose everything, or I'm losing everything, whatever different. It can be fear, it can be a strong attachment, it can be a strong anger, it can be any of those strong emotions. When there is strong emotion, there is strong sense of me or I or self. And when we have that strong sense of me or I or self, while that is emotion very strong, if we are skillful and if we have trained our mind to do that, and if we are skillful enough, from one corner of mind, then you watch how does that, at that point, how does the I or self or me appear to our mind or to ourself. And through that, then we might be able to identify the way the self or the I appear to us or to our mind in that moment, because it is much more easy to identify at that time how it appears. When we have strong sense of self, for example, I'm going to bathroom, I'm going to drink something, I'm going for a walk. We have sense of self, but the sense of self is not strong. And when we don't have a strong sense of self, then it's much more difficult to identify and to recognize how the self appear to ourselves and our emotion. And so it becomes much more vague, unclear, and difficult to identify how the self appear to ourselves or to our mind. And therefore, in order to be able to identify more easily and observe more easily, then it is recommended, it is advised, instructed to do that when we have strong emotions. Of course, a lot of time when you have strong emotion, we forget to do that. Our mind is not, but if we train our mind to do that all the time, and then even when you have strong emotion from one corner of the mind, you can observe that. And then if we are able to recognize, identify exactly how the I or self appear to us, then it will be more easier to identify the self that is to be negated and that is to be reputed, and to be able to recognize when we say selfless persons, then what does it means, so then we don't fall into the other extreme, thinking there's no self at all, generally, and so that is where, so that is the first kind of important. Once we have recognized that, how, when you have a strong sense of self, how does the I or sense appear to us, and how we cling and grasp the way it appeared to us. On the basis of that, then when we do the actual meditation and investigation or analysis, then as I mentioned, it becomes much more effective. If we don't recognize that, then sometimes it might seem, the meditation or emptiness might seem so easy. Seems so easy, at the same time not having any effect in our emotion. For example, if we talk about the table, when you do that kind of analysis, is this leg the table? Is that leg that each of four legs is one of those legs the table? Is the top the table? Is part of the table? And doing that kind of analysis, meditation doesn't seem any difficult, isn't it? And not being able to locate, not even to find in any of those parts and particles, and that it seems very easy. It doesn't seem emptiness difficult. And that is, again, when we don't, so then that kind of meditation, analyze it, doesn't become so effective in terms of dealing with our grasping towards that. And that is because, again, not being able to identify exactly what we are trying to negate within that table, the truly existing, what does that truly existing table that we are trying to negate, not being able to recognize, not being able to identify exactly that, that is where the problem comes. But when we identify that first, then on the basis of that, being able to recognize and identify exactly what is being negated, then when you do that analysis, then it becomes very effective in terms of destroying that grasping and that ignorance. So while we do that kind of analysis and trying to find, so before we do that analysis, trying to find either within the basis, the parts, or the collections, or the continuity of them, first is identifying how it appeared to us, how that ignorance mind grabs it. That is the main thing we have to understand. And to really have it, it's not enough just to have an intellectual understanding, but to really be able to understand by our own experience, by observing. By watching and observing when we have those strong emotions. And then you say, oh, that is how it appeared to my mind. That's how I feel. That's how my mind clings and grabs at that moment. And then when we analyze, then we begin to see, how that contradict how that our apprehending or misapprehending or grasping contradict exactly the way thing exists. And then when that happens, then when we have so strong certainty of that, then we will start to have some effect with our emotions. Otherwise, we do all this meditation analysis, but nothing really kind of changes our grasping and our delusions. Nothing really happens there. Because you are trying to destroy the enemy, which is not enemy. The enemy is, someone called, Tashi, and then you are trying to destroy Punzo, so because you mistook the enemy, and that can happen, and when we have not fully recognized and identified the self and the other object to be negated and refuted in our meditation on emptiness. And so that is one important factors. And I think maybe that can be, for this week, that can be your homework, Your homework is really kind of trying trying to identify, trying to recognize that. And sometimes, for example, in your meditations, you can sit down and, if there is someone who is bothering you, where you get easily upset and angry, or if there is something that you are very fearful about it, there are certain things that the moment you think about them, it can give rise to one of those strong negative emotions to arises, whatever that negative emotion it can be. And so you think about, you reflect on that, and then allow that strong emotion to arises. And when there is strong emotion to arises in relation to the self and I, then from one corner of that your mind, while that strong emotions is arising, while the sense of strong self is arising, because then try to observe, try to watch, and then through that try to understand and observe and understand how does the self or any objects appear to our mind, and how to our mind grasps. Does the self or object appear to us as though not exist from its own side, as though is existing from depending on our mind, or does it appear to exist without depending on the mind, the subject, the mind, existing as from its own side, objectively and truly? And so that we need to understand on experiential level through that kind of observations and watching. And then when in the teaching, when they said that, then you can understand with your own direct experience. Yes, that is how it appeared, and that is how my mind grabs. So then, it is not only in the book and teaching, but that has been authenticated by your own direct experience, and those are very important part of the meditations. Otherwise, we think maybe that might be their experience, maybe that is how they feel it, but that's not how I feel it. And so then we have gap, in what all these teachings says about and how we feel about it. And so and again, so I think maybe that can be a homework, if we can do every day a little bit, 10-15 minutes of that meditation for 1 week, that might be helpful, for the meditations as we go some of the coming kind of analytical meditations that is explained here. So then that kind of analyze, that kind of meditation can become then more effective. Otherwise, it might not be as effective as it should be, because we are missing some point, and that particular point that I just mentioned. So I think maybe we'll kind of stop here today. And if there is any questions or comments, I can kind of take them. If not, then we do the dedications.
Nobody has questions?
I have a question. I don't know if it's
Yes,
too big
please.
a question. Okay.
Yes.
I have been for a long time confused about the meaning of emptiness and the wisdom of emptiness. And I know that's a huge subject, but trying to meditate on it, I'm confused as to how to meditate. Can you say anything?
Well, I think next week we will go through the analysis, the meditations. Of course, there are many different meditation analyses. And one of the first meditation analysis in relation to emptiness is the one that I just spoke today, to give you the homework for 1 week, you know, to allow one of those strong emotion to arises and strong sense of self, while that strong sense of emotion and I is arising from one corner of the mind. You try to observe, you try to watch, how does the sense of I or me appear to your mind in that moment? You know, does it appear that self to exist from its own side, objectively, truly from its own side, or does it appear it existing by depending on the subject, the mind? So it's kind of watching, observing that, and not only how it appears, does your mind started to cling and grasp or apprehend the way it appeared to us or not? You know, after first there is appearance, then there is second, then there is our mind started to, you know, grasp or apprehend the way it appeared to, or does it grasp differently than it appeared? You know, even though it appears something else, then your mind grasp something else, or does your mind grasp or apprehend the way it appeared to us? And so that is one of the meditation in relation to the emptiness, is one of the point. You know, there are many kind of points in meditation on emptiness, and so that will be for this week you can do that meditation, and then next week we do the other meditation, the second point, the main point of the meditations. And so, yeah, so I think that is the meditation. And wisdom realizing emptiness is, as we do that kind of meditations, then eventually we will have a realizations of what it means, and then we develop a wisdom that understand and realize, you know, what that emptiness is, you know. So first, the emptiness is, when you talk about emptiness or selflessness, we are talking about the ultimate nature of any phenomena. So that is the nature or ultimate nature or reality of phenomena. And then we try to meditate on that. We try to think, analyze, and meditate on that. That is the meditations. And through meditation, then we can develop the wisdom. You know, then through the meditations, then eventually we will have the wisdom that understand and realize the emptiness. So that is where there is the emptiness, which is the nature of the things, and then we try to reflect, contemplate, meditate on that nature. That is the meditation. And having meditated on that, reflected, contemplated on that, then we will develop the wisdom that relies and understand that emptiness, and that's the wisdom. Okay.
Okay. Well, yes. Thank you. That was helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I also want to say one thing quickly. Just I appreciate your what you said. I think last week we were going through all the arguments about, you know, the different viewpoints, and whether what the Buddha said and didn't say, and the sutras and so forth. And you gave us some very practical advice about just you know, going with what works for us. And I appreciate your down to earth attitude and words about that.
Oh,
It was very helpful in a very confusing subject.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think sometimes we can
Okay.
get caught up in all kind of, argument, whether it was taught by Buddha or not, or this and that. The main point is, if it helps us, it doesn't matter whether Buddha taught it or not. If it doesn't help us, then even if Buddha taught it, we just have to skip that part and try to apply that something that help us. And I think that is definitely, it is a way to go about. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll read the dedication list. The people who've recently died: Valstona, children in bunkers, Sanjukta Tamang,